So the first thing that I'd like to say generally is please, after the session, take your money and go shop at the store. No, but it's important because you guys know that these people, they know your dogs and cats. They have worked with you through health issues. They vet all the products that come into the stores. It's a real service. I mean, I always talk a lot about the fact that I make products and put them out on the market, but it's these people that are actually connecting with you and selling those products. And some of the products that we make are really weird, and they need people to actually be able to sort of talk through those things. And so I think it's really important to support and that's where we put all of our effort towards. You know, we don't make a huge effort to sell online or anything like that because we want that money to go into the local economy and to the people who actually built us. So I think that's a really important thing, and I'll never remember who actually said this, but whenever I say that, I'm like, I could just say I said it because I don't know who said it. So, but somebody once said it wasn't Walmart that put the hardware store out of business. It was the person that wanted to pay 50 cents less for a hammer. So I think it's important that we do that. So thank you guys so much for having me. It was a little bit of a thrill for me when I arrived because we just released frozen food for the first time, and I've never seen it in a store. So I got to see it up there. I've used it, but I've never gotten the chance to see it in the store. So it never becomes, that never gets old for me in the entire development process of all the products, and then actually getting to see them and then getting to help your animals. It's a big step for us as a company as well because we kind of did the opposite of what everyone else did, which is most people start as a pet food company and then they want to diversify as they grow, and so they sort of release supplemental products, but we've been doing supplemental products for 10 years and then released a food. So we appreciate your trust in that process, and we want to be as transparent as possible. So the number one thing that I want to be a through line through this kind of talk is we'll have a lot of time for questions. So please ask questions because I think that's the most important part because it gives everyone an idea of what we're all actually wanting to know about. Plus, I think we all learn more that way. But I'm going to talk about Green Juju things, but it's more important that you just understand nutrition because companies change all the time. This company was the best, and then they changed, and now I have to pick something else. And if you just know things about that company, then it's pretty useless for just general information. And so everything I'm talking about, I don't think you have to buy one Green Juju product to actually put into effect in some way or another in your dog or cat's life, just in general. So hopefully that is a nice through line. But I will be giving some, company history and how we came about and that kind of thing as well. First of all, a little bit about me. So I actually worked my way up sort of on my own and being 100% self-taught. So what seems like a really long time ago, I just turned 41 this month. So what seems like a long time ago, I got a dog, and that dog's name was Lua, and it was my first dog I'd ever gotten, and I was like in my 20s. I never had any animals growing up, didn't have any interest in I was actually deathly scared of dogs. So I was very famously afraid of a group of golden retriever puppies that didn't have their eyes open yet. I was 6 years old, and I was running away from them very scared. And so I got this dog, and I walked into a pet store, and I said to the lady, what do I feed this dog? And that question has been the center of my mind for the last 15-ish years. It's literally all I think about. Emily would tell you I think about probably 3 to 4 things, and that one of those things is nutrition. One of them is also the Green Bay Packers. I know we're not in Wisconsin, but one of them is also the Green Bay Packers. But it was interesting because my story started with a couple mentors of mine and 2 sisters and sort of begging them to work for them. and I didn't know them, and I wrote them a very long email, and I said, you got to hire me because I only want to work for you. And they said, okay, we'll hire you, but for free. We can't pay you. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, that's my in. So I worked for free for 2 years, while having a full-time job to get my foot in the door. And then I worked my way up to eventually be vice president of that company in development. And now I work for, coming up on 3 years for Green Juju in the role of vice president of nutrition and communication. So one of the really nice things about Green Juju is we are one of the truly last indie pet food companies. So even all the small companies out there have investment, and with investment comes investors, obviously, and those investors want specific margins, and they want to have a say over the products and how those things go out. And in my experience, they're not very concerned with nutrition and or new ideas. And so one of the nice things is everything we're going to talk about, it's just really me and Kelly, and whatever we think is cool, we just do it. And I'll give you an idea of who Kelly is if you don't know that as well. Totally just lost my train of thought as to how I got to this point from my story. But so what I like about I think what gives me an advantage in an unconventional sort of educational setting is the idea that we don't want to just go off what the established knowledge is, right? Because you can have the established knowledge, and I would say 8 years ago I was really concerned with how do I get as much established knowledge as I can. But I'd say it's morphed into how do we create new things that produce better health outcomes. Because anyone who tells you this is the best diet for dog or cat just is not being true to themselves, because science changes all the time. We have to continually look at what is the best diet for ourselves, what is the best diet for our dog and cat. And so my absolute favorite thing is creating something that doesn't have an existing real premise for it. It's not as if, hey, these companies have done this thing, so we're going to do our version of that thing. It's, hey, this thing doesn't exist, and I think it can give, an inroad to a better health issue. And I think that's how we really drive nutrition. And so that's kind of where we're trying to push it. So the first thing I want to talk about is vegetation. And this is a little bit of a history lesson, I feel like, because we've been making pet food really bad for a long time. And I know this firsthand because I go to AFCO meetings, and AFCO are the people who make the laws. Well, they make recommendations, and then states turn those recommendations into laws. Now, that might change. There's something happening with Congress making pet food federal. I don't know exactly how that's going to shake out. I'll probably know more in August. The AFCO meeting is in San Antonio.
We don't want that. Yeah, it doesn't sound good.
There's good things and there's bad things.
Worse things?
No, the good thing would be, so one of the things that we go through as a company is state registrations, which is a complete nightmare. We have to register in 50 states, and they're all going off essentially the same document, but they interpret it differently. And so we actually have someone on staff who that's their entire job, is to do that. And then when it gets if there's a problem, it gets kind of kicked up to me or whatever. But here's a good example. The state of Rhode Island requires that we put all of our labels onto a burned CD and send that to them. And we were all like, we don't have a CD drive on our computer. How are we going to, so there's many, many things like that, or print them all out, or whatever it might be, to do this. So the one positive thing would be that it's one agency that's regulating it. Now, the bad part about that would be if the one agency says no, then that's bad. But here's the good and the bad, and this is going to be a weird point. It will be less regulated. Now, that's bad if you're a giant corporation that's doing bad things. However, as a producer myself, I think to myself, I can do more fun things if that's the case. So if you actually trust your company and trust the people that make it, it can be a good thing. And here's why I say that. When you develop a food, there's there is now a common food list which provides a little bit more leeway. But if an item is a food or feed item, as if not just like a very, I don't mean supplemental feeding. What I mean is it's not a supplement, which is completely unregulated. Basically, in order to use an ingredient, I have to open up the OP and I have to find out. I have to look, and if it's not in there, I can't use it. And there's not that many things in there, so it really limits the creativeness with which we can do some certain things. A good example of that would be turmeric is in there, but it's only there as a colorant. So that's the only thing you can use it for in a feed or a food product is as a colorant. And we use very small amounts, so to be honest with you, when the states say like, what is this for? I go, it's a colorant.
I'm sorry, explain to me when you said you have to open up the OP, what's an OP?
Great question. It's called the official publication, and it is the document that AFCO puts out every year, and it's what the states use as their sort of regulatory guides. But here's another crazy thing. Some states, the AFCO updates their OP every year. And the funny thing is, if you want it, you can buy it, by the way, but it costs like $225. So who's going to do that, right? But some states will say to you, oh, we understand that's in the OP now, but we're using an old version. So what am I supposed to do with that, right? So it's kind of for lack of better terms, a shit show. To be able to do it. But so I go back to my point of we made pet food so wrong for so long. And the reason why we did that was because even to this day, if you go to the meetings, the FDA actually calls it recycling. And I've been to presentations where the FDA actually says, if we don't put this waste into pet food, it's going to go into a landfill, and that's going to be bad for the environment. So my dog is not a landfill. And so essentially, what we were making pet food with corn and wheat and soy and all these things we know are just bad, that the general public now understands is bad for dogs for the wrong reasons, right? So then when we decided we're going to make good pet food, we've swung too far in this direction, said no plants. We're not going to use plants at all. We're going to use as little as possible in raw food or whatever people were thinking. And that was also the wrong direction. Because what we needed to do was understand that the things that they were using those plants for, fat and protein, plants are not good at fat and protein. Plants are good at antioxidants and fiber and vitamins and minerals and vitamin precursors and all of those things that you're looking for. Well, animal products are really good for fat and protein and fat-soluble vitamins, which we'll kind of go into. And so when Kelly Marion, the owner of Green Juju, who's actually going to be here in like 2 weeks. So I should bring her by. It's always a trip because it's actually kind of ironic because I used to live in Seattle and work for a Pennsylvania-based food company, and now I live in Pennsylvania and work for a Seattle-based pet food company. But it's always funny when she comes here because she was like born and raised in Seattle, in the city, and has lived there her entire life. So this is kind of a trip with a lot of time spent with baby goats and Amish farmers and things like that. But so when Kelly started, it was with this original Just Greens blend, and people actually laughed at her when she'd go to farmers markets, and they said, why would we feed vegetables to dogs? But as it turns out, we're completely flipping that on its head now because we're actually engaged right now in a study that we've been doing for about 1.5 years. And what we looked at was there's this company called Animal Biome, and they measure the innate bacteria that levels in healthy dog populations. So what they do is they get these samples in, and they take they take all these bacteria subsets. So there's really 2 different sort of things you're looking at when it comes to your own microbiome and when it comes to your dog or cat's microbiome, or really any mammal. But so there's a probiotic bacteria that we'll talk about, which is like bacteria that your dog gets through diet. So fermented foods, probiotic supplements, just naturally occurring bacteria. Those usually only last about 1 to 3 days, so that's why you need to sort of replenish them. And they all have a ton of purposes. Like any list of bacteria you get is going to have like if it's a well-studied bacteria, there'll be like 15 different things they've studied. Like it helps to metabolize this vitamin, it helps to create this pathway. It also, and so all these bacteria are very important. But what they're measuring is the innate bacteria that just always exist, be it through. So a good example of that would be if you eat a high protein diet, your microflora is going to be made up of bacteria that digest protein easier, or fat if you eat a higher fat diet, or whatever that might be. It's one of the little I guess hypotheses that I have when it comes to like people changing their eating habits. I feel like if you eat a high carb diet and then you try to switch and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, your bacteria are like screaming at you, being like, no, I want carbs. And I feel like that's part of the process. But so they basically have taken all these data samples and they take healthy bacteria ranges and they say, this bacteria is usually between this amount and this amount, or makes up this percentage in a healthy dog population. So whatever that means, because every dog is going to be slightly different. And so those are made up. The other thing that's made up too is of say the bacteria you got from your mother, and things like that, which is also very, very important. And so what they were noticing over time, which might be surprising, is that dogs, even dogs that are fed raw diets, don't have diverse enough microbiomes. And so what does that mean, right? It means two things: that they're not getting enough fiber, and they're also not getting enough plant diversity. So one of the hallmarks in just general mammal microbiome diversity is how many different species of plants you get from your diet. It doesn't mean you're making up a majority of your dog's diet in a plant-based way. It just means you're getting a diversity of those species. So what we're looking at with the study now, and this is we're sort of doing organically, so it's going to take a little while, but we've got the preliminary results back, and I also knew what the results were going to be before they were there, but we actually need the data. Is that when people add our Just Greens in this study, they're getting better diversity and better percentages as far as healthy dog populations go, and then B, we're reducing the bad bacteria in the gut pretty normally, and that's one of the results we're finding as well. And that's just with the addition of really one product, and that's more about the diversity of the fiber itself. So fiber supplements can be a great tool, but I don't know if it ever actually compares to, say, eating 10 different plants that have different fiber types in them. And also those types of fibers that those plants sort of like evolutionarily have used to digest in the gut over time. So a good example of that would be if you rotate between our 3 vegetable blends, you'll get 17 different plants into your dog's diet, which is probably way more than we get, to be honest with you, right? Just generally. So we're basically, but then you also want to look at this from everything is connected at every level when it comes to nutrients, when it comes to, fat, protein, fiber, all these things. So you're not just feeding. The other part that is sometimes limiting with a fiber supplement is it's just a fiber supplement. So this is for fiber, but we don't necessarily want the majority of the things that we feed our animals to be just for one thing. So if those things contain fiber and also contain, antioxidant colors in nature, and if they also contain vitamin precursors like vitamin A, like beta carotene, things like that, that's also part of that system. And there's a lot of really great, there was a particular study with bladder cancer that looked at orange vegetables, and then one with dark leafy greens, and it was replacing up to 20% 3 times a week of the actual diet, and they saw a 90% reduction in that type of bladder cancer, just in that one thing. And those were kibble-fed dogs that just replaced part of their diet. And I believe with the orange vegetables, it was like high 70s, which is part of the reason we did the golden blend, was around that time, which was we wanted something like that to put out. And so these are very small changes you can make in order to actually be able to get a better health outcome, because none of us can predict the future, right? We all want our dogs to live forever. I think it's better to focus on the quality of life and then hope for quantity. I think that's really how we should look at it. But everyone wants our dogs, to live forever. But genetics are a thing, are really the biggest contributing factor. And so the nice thing is we can use something called epigenetics, which is food, to try to reverse some of these bad genetics. And I can tell you, dogs and cats have terrible genetics, and it's not because we're pure breeding them, and it is to some degree, but that's really not the biggest factor. The biggest factor is that one of the largest factors in gene expression that you have in your life is what your mother ate when she was pregnant. And it's not just that, it's what your mother's mother ate and what your mother's mother's mother ate, and down the line. And so it's kind of funny because, when my wife was pregnant, luckily she's really into nutrition as well, in some ways even weirder than I am. However, I got really into like the nutrition of what conception and pregnancy and birth and all those things are. And so a lot of times when you hear people say like, "Oh, I'm pregnant, I can eat whenever I want," I'm like, "Oh no, you can't. You gotta be as healthy as possible during this time." And I will give you one interesting study in the human field, is that there is a really good study that actually showed that women who take cod liver oil when they're pregnant have babies that have higher IQs than people who don't. So, my dad brag is that, to this day, as I mentioned, my daughter's about to turn 3, but her favorite food that she has every morning is raw milk with cod liver oil in it. So she kills it, and I don't know if someone's going to tell her it's gross at some point and that's going to be over, but I'm going to do the best I can for as long as I possibly can with that. We're not totally weird. She likes Oreos and stuff like that too. So we're not just like only doing, the very strange things. Me? No. I'm kind of the opposite. Which we can kind of go over too a little bit. Not my personal dietary habits, but generally like how those things fit with animal nutrition as well. Because in a lot of ways, what we put into practice, especially with some of our like newer products and things like that, is very like based in human traditional foods, and then how those relate to food as we go on. So going back to the vegetable point, I think that they carry as far as health goes, I think we need to move away from, dogs need a majority of their diet to be animal based. Therefore, plants are less important. I don't think that the percentage of the diet makeup indicates just how important or not important something can be. And that would be very true in the case of like minerals, right? You need very small amounts of these minerals, but there'll be a catastrophic effect if you have a deficiency over a very, very long period of time. And so there is no debate anymore. Plants are 100% necessary, and you should all be, feeding as much variety as you possibly can. And what I mean by that is like, my dog gets variety in 3 ways. So number one, whatever I'm feeding him, I have the dreaded question of like, Emily was like, Maple might want to feed the dog. And I was like, nope, that's my thing. That's my daughter's name. I was like, that's my favorite thing. So maybe she can like, put the thing on the ground or something. But he gets what I feed. He also gets what we are eating when we're cooking. So vegetables, for instance, there's a lot of berries in our house, that kind of thing. And then he also gets what my daughter feeds him. So those are 3 different variety factors. And that is part of his, I will tell you, yesterday I was in the kitchen doing something and she was eating, and I saw her give Huckleberry an entire piece of smoked raw cheese about, this big. And I was like, there you go. That's actually a pretty significant part of his nutrition that day. And I could go through and catalog all the healthy things about raw cheese. And why that made sense, and it was going to happen anyway. So, I may as well just embrace it. So I would encourage that. So you can do a lot of diversity just in what you have in your refrigerator. That's a healthy thing. So if you're feeding a processed food and you just want to start adding some of your vegetables that are like finely chopped up, great. That's a great starting point. And don't worry as much about offsetting any sort of like complete imbalance necessarily. So first of a couple things on that. Just I go off on a lot of tangents. I swear I'm trying to move down a linear line of starting with the blends and then moving past and moving on to some other things. But complete and balanced is a really interesting thing, and you learn more about complete and balanced when you go to these AFCO meetings because they are really the ones who regulate what that means on a package. And so I think it's good to have some established level. But I also know that, for instance, a lot of those values, we don't have dog values for, so they're actually pig values. But pigs are very similar to dogs, similar enough that they could make those changes based on that. And so I think even if we meet that nutrition threshold, some of those we don't know as much as people would think about that. And some of those are just politics and lobbying. I've seen ingredient lobbyists lobby for higher levels and things because they want to sell more of those things. So some of those. So what I'm trying to say is there's an established baseline, but let's not worry too much about, because we don't worry about that with ourselves. Classic case, I had a woman reach out to us and she was trying to better her dog who had a lot of allergy issues. And for the past 2 years, she had only fed this dog sweet potato. That's the one thing she fed. And you know what? The dog was pretty fine. And that's 2 years of obviously a not balanced diet. And I'm not recommending that. But your dog is not going to fall off a cliff if something is imbalanced, at any given time for, a short period of time. So feeding those things is great, but also feeding extra vegetation like that is fine because it makes up almost no calories. The serving recommendation, an ounce of our Just Greens is 9 calories. It's kind of like when you go to eat a salad and you eat this huge bunch of kale or something like that, and it's 30 calories. So don't worry too much about that. And I think the more I learn about, Green Juju, we have freeze-dried and frozen food. The frozen food, it arrived today, right?
Yeah, yesterday.
Yesterday. So it arrived yesterday. And we formulate that to meet the nutritional profiles of AFCO. But the other thing we are actually doing a feeding trial on it in probably early May, I think, is when it's going to start. And that's 26 weeks. That's an AFCO official feeding trial. It's not done in a lab with like beagles and whatnot. It's done in home with dogs that are actually loved and live with families and stuff like that. We're not going to. So that'll give us some data as well. But then even with that data, we still don't know exactly what your dog needs because every dog and cat are different. And so you're your dog's best advocate and you can see what works best with their body within that framework. So I would encourage you, to be confident in that as well. So last thing I'll say about the vegetables, which is kind of a funny story, is Kelly, this whole Green Juju company started because her dog had a rare joint tumor and she wanted to get her dog ready for surgery. So she went to the pet store to find something like Just Greens, and there was nothing that existed. So she just started making it at home. She started juicing these vegetables and then adding the pulp back, which is something we still do to this day. And she was a dog walker, and she was giving it to her clients' dogs, and lo and behold, it started clearing up a lot of health issues, allergy issues especially. And she said, oh, this could be a business maybe. So a local pet store heard of this, and they said, bring us a sample. We'd like to see it, and then maybe we might want to sell this product. So she brought a sample in. It was in a little plastic container about yay big and gave it to the store. And the store employee said, I'll just keep this in the freezer for the owner. And then she left. And then lo and behold, without knowing her, about an hour later, I walked in. and they accidentally sold it to me. So I was actually the first retail Green Juju customer of all time, which was part of my plan to become vice president of the company roughly 12 years later or whatever it was. Yeah.
Is there any specific vegetables or herbs we should keep, not like spices? It's not good for animals, or is that too big of a question?
There's not that. He's asking about, is there any like things we should stay away from? There's really not that many outside of like the classic like onions and like some of the spices are an interesting one because they're not really like used to that, but also a lot of those spices are actually the highest in antioxidant foods. Like
When you're cooking or something, or whatever, you give the dog, or we try to do it before that.
yeah, but I wouldn't mind if there was some pepper on it or
Don't
some.
grab like your dash seasoning.
Some,
Real seasoning.
yeah, there you go. But like on the flip side of that, like cinnamon is one of the highest antioxidant foods. These foods, or like herbs, are wonderful. So if you're cooking with cilantro or parsley or all these things, those are things that are in, just greens. In fact, there's a lot of plants in those, and that might be a good guide if you are like, oh, what can I feed? But most things are things you can feed. Any mushroom that you can eat, your dog can eat. There's no issue there.
The mushrooms have to be cooked, because I've been seeing that mushrooms are supposed to be cooked. I thought they were allowed to be raw.
That's a great question, and I'm going to go over that when I talk about our mushroom thing. So that's a good, but a good rule of thumb is there's different benefits for all things, either cooked or raw or fermented. And the idea that nobody was getting those benefits before they started cooking them or extracting them, or, if a company tells you this is the only way, it's probably not the only way, right? There's probably many ways to get the nutrients out of said food product. Yeah.
I missed the clarification on onions and things like that, garlic.
Garlic is great. Garlic is a great one to feed. No, and even, it's funny, don't feed grapes, but even that's really in question. All these studies, like the avocado one, all these studies are not good studies. The garlic one was they were feeding them like 18 cloves of garlic a day. So it's not like that's an actual relevant study.
And it wasn't actually toxic, it just changed like what, the white cell count
Yeah.
or something?
Yeah, so, but using that, it's beneficial in the same way, or it's beneficial in the same way it's beneficial to you if fed in even reasonable amounts. So definitely do that. I'll go into the mushroom thing because this is something that we just put out, which. Oh yeah.
One other question, and I spent the afternoon concocting my smoothies, and I make advanced batches and then freeze it. And I was wondering, are there conflicting ingredients? Like, I mix spinach in with kale, and I worry about, my son warns me about too many oxalates and all this other business. And I'll just put in what kind of is what's ever in the kitchen. I had some old kimchi that was in there, and I threw that in there. And are there conflicting ingredients?
Everything helps or conflicts with everything all the time in nutrition. And that's where people break it down, and they're like, if you're getting this vitamin and you get this vitamin, it'll increase the absorption, or it'll here's a good example of that. If you are eating foods with a lot of phytic acid, which is an anti-nutrient, that's actually a good point to make about the complete and balanced protocols as well. So phytic acid comes in foods like corn and grains and legumes, and it stops mineral absorption, or even can, really take minerals out of your body. And so when they did the complete and balanced protocols, they were doing those for kibble. And by the way, there's 2 for cats, but there's only 1 for dogs, and it's kibble. So every food has to be made to the specifications of kibble and for nutrient value. But what they did was they said, we're going to increase these minerals because pet foods are made with foods that are high in phytic acid. So then what happens when you make a food like we made that doesn't have any phytic acid in it? you still have to go to those nutritional levels. Are those the right levels? Well, that's actually debatable at that point. And so everything interacts with everything to the point where you could drive yourself crazy trying to think about it. So what I do is I try to do as many, whether it's for people or dogs, I try to do as many whole, mostly unprocessed foods as possible. And so,
Rotation moderation.
Yeah.
That's been what we follow as well. We talk to people here all the time, like, don't rely on that every day.
moderation, except if you're buying green juju, then just overdo it 500%, you're fine. Well, and it's, if you like charity, a portion of every proceed goes to paying my daughter's Montessori school tuition, so, which is not cheap. So, but then she looks at me and I'm like, I'll do anything for you. So that's 100% fine.
Rotate the green juju.
Yeah, there you go. Rotate through the green juju. And so that really is the basis of our company was Just Greens and that innovation. And when I left my last job, I actually sought Green Juju out because I saw that integrity and that innovation. And I remember I flew to Seattle and I had a meeting. I said to Kelly, I'm going to have a meeting with you. I'm going to be in Seattle. And then she was confirming. She's like, why are you coming here? And I'm like, to meet with you. And it totally freaked her out. So that's one of the reasons I want to do that, because now people say like, oh, this brand has a veggie blend or this brand, but at the time, no one had ever done that before. And that was actually the first product to have bone broth in it as well. And bone broth is one of those products that is, and we're getting back to the mushrooms, I promise. So bone broth was one of those products that is now widely available, but at the time, Kelly was a real innovator on that. And so mushrooms are a hot thing right now, and for good reason. And there's powders, there's tinctures, there's a lot going on. There's triple extracted through water and all these different things. And to be honest with you, there's some bumping heads going on about what's right and what's not right. So we did a mushroom product, and we did something that was totally different, and really proud of it because it doesn't exist in the human pet food or human nutrition world or the pet food world. And like some of our other products, it was born in my kitchen and scaled up and is made in Likens, near Likens, Pennsylvania. So right up here, we actually get our mushrooms from an organic mushroom farm that's about 40 minutes south of Lancaster. And it's one Amish guy that puts it in, that ferments it, and then two Amish guys that put it into a bottle. So it's a really interesting process. So it's a wild fermented mushroom probiotic. So we actually, we just salt brine the mushrooms. So we add a little bit of sea salt to them, which brings the pH down. And once the pH goes down, all those wonderful bacteria and healthy yeast that exist on the mushroom and in the mushroom start to grow. And then as they start to grow, the pH lowers. And so that's also our food safety step, because anything below a 4.6 pH, Listeria, E. coli, and Salmonella have a really hard time growing. And so, so as that starts to drop, so it's a really simplistic product in its complexity. And what I mean by that is all the probiotics and healthy yeast come from the mushrooms themselves. This is the future of probiotics, in my opinion. Whether you get them from our mushroom probiotic or somewhere else, it is all about diversity, like we were talking about, but this is a different form of diversity. So what's the traditional method by which we've given probiotics in the past? My dog has an issue, therefore they need a probiotic. I have a stomach issue, therefore I need a probiotic. But that's not really what it's about. It's about how do we get as many different species of good bacteria into the gut at a time as we possibly can. So you're going to get every study I've looked at with wild fermented products, which means naturally existing probiotics, you're going to get at least 100 different species of probiotics every time you do it, in different genus types, different species types within those genus types. And the real key to this thing is it's going to change every time you use it. So it depends on, was that mushroom fermented in the summer? Because there's going to be different wild yeast in the air versus the spring. Was that mushroom, the soil for this mushroom was different than this mushroom. And all these probiotics are also soil-based. And it's a living food. So when you thaw it out, all those probiotics are alive and in that food. And if you're going to ask me what it tastes like, because I get that asked a lot, I have tried it. It tastes like pickled dirt, I would say, is a good way to describe it. Very healthy if you want to put it in your smoothie or whatever you're doing over there. Super healthy, but so for me, now if you're using something like, so you have to put this together like a puzzle. We talked about we need to feed those bacteria through all of these, vegetable variation. Now we need the bacteria. So if you're doing that, this is a great base for just general diversity. Now if you're using that with, say, raw milk, which has, we know, at least 200 species, but that's even, I think, on the low end. Now you're talking about, some of those may overlap with like 300 different species, and that's in one meal. And it's not always about the amount, it's about the usability and the diversity of them. So a soil-based organism that's contained within food is going to have a lot better chance at surviving stomach acid and actually being used than, say, something in pill form. Pill form is also good, and the nice thing is all this stuff can be used in conjunction with each other. If you have a probiotic powder that you love, these things will create more diversity, so they can be helpful in that way. Like a good example of that is, we have a video on our website with Adored Beast probiotics about how to ferment our milk. If you're using something like that, that's great. They've done a lot of really innovative things, and you can kind of use those things together. But also,
We posted the recipes.
Oh, yeah.
We want it, we got it up there, like Ranger do with Adored Beast, so you can implement your own.
yeah, and the other thing about the mushroom probiotic is it's really affordable. It's $9.99 MSRP, and it will last a 50-pound dog up to a month. So
Dogs do like dirt.
yeah, so that it's, and we do really try to keep the price at the most reasonable level we can. And one of the ways we can do that is because we don't have a huge staff or investors, and we all are crazy people and work all the time. But I think it pays off in being able to provide things like that.
Question.
Yeah.
For, like, I take probiotics,
Mhm.
and I recently read that you need prebiotics for the probiotics to
Yeah.
work. Is
So
that true?
yeah, so the prebiotics would be that dietary fiber that I was talking about,
Okay.
and just general, like, and a lot of probiotics have prebiotics in them. I take when I go on the road, I still drink raw milk every day, but I have less access to just the general diversity of foods that I eat. So I take a travel probiotic, and it has a prebiotic in it. And then there's postbiotics, which are sort of all of the chemical reactions that happen from the bacteria in your gut. So akin to, so when you ferment foods, those bacteria produce organic acids and enzymes and all those things. And so those are what they call postbiotics, which are important as well. So I would either A, just make sure you're having enough fiber, or B, take a prebiotic with it, or take a probiotic with a prebiotic.
And how about overdoing it?
As far as fiber goes, or just probiotics? I don't think you can overdo it when it comes to food-based ones. I don't doubt if there was a dog that was had only eaten processed food its entire life, and then you gave it 5 capsules of probiotics, you would probably deal with, yeah. So anytime you use a good example, my dog will eat the mushroom probiotic and will lick the bottom of Emily's raw Greek yogurt bowl, and then we'll also get, we eat, Maple loves this certain variety of raw coconut yogurt, so I'll put that on as food. So all these different foods I'm doing that provide all these different bacteria sets. And, once, as a lot of you know, if you feed your dog a raw diet, once you actually start feeding them like yourself, their stomach is the same. There typically is no transition period between foods and things. They just are actually, that's kind of something we've done to them. You don't see a wolf in the wild being like, I would eat that rabbit, but I've been eating deer, so I'm going to eat 40% rabbit and 60%. Yeah. So you're not, yeah. So
Everybody switched to beef now.
yeah, so it's one of those things where the more you get them exposed to different types of foods, the easier they have, which makes sense when you think about it in those terms. Yeah.
I have 2 questions.
Yep.
What about fruit, and what are the benefits of giving your dog the raw milk or the juju milk?
That's a great question. I don't know anything about raw milk, so I'll just throw that one. No. So fruit is great. I mean, I think in moderation is best because it is higher in sugar. I think berries are really my go-to when it comes to that because they are also really high in fiber. Little pro tip: I did a little thing with a vet. If any of you know Judy Morgan. So we did a live thing together. But if you take your berries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, whatever, put them in a glass jar. Fill that glass jar with kombucha, and then leave it on your counter for 1 to 3 days. It'll actually ferment those berries, and then you can get those probiotics, the antioxidant content of the kombucha, the postbiotics of all of those processes, and that'll keep in your fridge for 30 days. So you can just kind of keep just taking them out whenever you want to feed them. Kombucha, yeah. And all of you should brew your own kombucha. Yeah.
Okay, one statement and a question. I want to work for you, but I can only afford to work for free for part-time, so.
Sure. Every time I tell that story, this is what I get. So.
So I got that out of the way
Yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah.
And then, is there truth? I have a friend who, I do the probiotics, and I know, I saw a talk that you did about I think it's Saccharomyces boulardii or something for when the dog was having some
Yeah.
diarrhea, and that was a huge help. And her response is that, I can't, fermentation, which is what probiotics are, they're fermented by something is what
Yeah, technically, yeah.
Yeah, so she's like, but that can, her dog's prone to mast cell tumors, and that's where something goes that route.
Yeah.
That's good. And is there a different fermentation that might?
There's a lot, yeah. So
It's not just that one.
We're-
Okay, then we don't have to go.
No. I'm going to answer that question. We're going to start with the milk, and then we're going to answer that question. No, that's a great question. I have a great answer for that. But side note, Saccharomyces boulardii is probiotic yeast, and it's a great thing for you if you're on antibiotics or your dog is, because antibiotics don't kill yeast. And so if you are in that situation, definitely pick that up. You can pick it up at the store. Jarrow is a good brand of that. That's the one that I've used, and or for, if a family member's been on antibiotics or dogs. So that's a side note. But we'll talk about milk, and then we'll go to the mast cell thing, because the mast cell thing is really interesting. So raw milk is the healthiest food on the planet. It is, and actually everyone here lives in a really raw milk friendly state, which is not the case in most of the country, and so you should be really thankful for that, quite frankly. But raw milk is what every company is trying to achieve, but just doesn't have the wherewithal to do it. What are we trying to do? We're trying to make one food that is good enough, that meets the nutritional needs of all of your dog or cat, and that's all they need. But we simply don't have the science to get there. But raw milk is something that comes from nature and is very particular. And so what I mean, so first of all, a couple of misconceptions right off the bat. There's an idea that, hey, cow's milk is for baby cows, and so that's the only species that should drink it and that it's applicable to, or goat's milk is for baby goats, or whatever that might be. But if you actually look at the science, all milks, doesn't matter what it is. Camel milk, human breast milk, goat milk, they're all made of exactly the same thing. They're just in different amounts. So the fat profile in goat's milk is, the saturated fat is medium chain fatty acids, like in coconut oil. That's primarily what they are. The fat profile in cow's milk is this really healthy underrated fat called butter fat, and it's going to be higher in that. But both of those milks have both of those fats. They're just in different amounts, right? And so that's why it's so applicable to every species. So I've seen dogs thrive only consuming raw milk and water for like 5 years and completely thrive, because raw milk contains every nutrient that we've ever discovered in its most bioavailable form. So going back to your question earlier, every food has a different digestibility level. I know that right now Emily is going down a particular rabbit hole with magnesium in different food sources and how much is actually absorbed and digestible, and if you eat it with this food, you're not absorbing enough, and what is the recommended daily amount. However, raw milk is completely different. Every nutrient in raw milk has an enzyme and cofactor that digests it 100%, because it's actually made to be food by nature. And so your dog or cat will be absorbing 100% of those nutrients at all times. It also contains all of those native bacteria that are made to set up an immune system. So 25% of it is digestible not by your animal, but by the bacteria that innately live in it. So again, it's not about the amount, it's about the usability of those bacteria. And the bacteria is a really interesting story. You asked the wrong question, because this could be it for the rest of this thing. So the bacteria point is really interesting because I was looking at a study recently where they were looking at raw cow's milk and the different bacteria sets in all of them. So they were working from 4 farms, and when they analyzed a specific cow's raw milk, they could tell what farm it was from based on the bacteria in the milk itself. But then it would be an individual even in the case of those cows, but they would have some similarities, right? And so the really interesting thing is we work with a co-op of about 15 local farms here. All of our milk comes from up by Lycans in Lancaster County. So I just did my farm inspections like a couple weeks ago, so I personally inspect every farm that we work with. And so when you work with those, every goat has a different bacteria set based on their genetics, based on if they like going out to pasture, if they like eating more feed and they like being inside more, if they like all these things, what time of year it was. So we're taking all of those goats and combining their milk together, and then you're getting like a bunch of goats in every one of those cartons, and it's all different bacteria sets. So it's like rotating that throughout, it's like rotating probiotics while still just buying the same product. It also is the most fat diverse food on the planet. I'm going to talk about the food, I think, next, but we talk about omega-3s a lot, omega-6s. Milk has 400 different fatty acids. It is, and we don't even know what they all do. We discover new things all the time. We just know that they have some metabolic purpose, and that's really interesting because we really have a lack of understanding, I think, more than people know when it comes to even foods we've been studying for a long time. And in that cofactor and enzyme, most foods, it is a myth to say that if you eat a food raw, it contains the enzymes that. So every food that you eat raw doesn't contain the enzymes it needs to be digested. That is just simply not true. But raw milk is not that way, and so and it can be used in a lot of different sort of feeding protocols and things like that with a lot of common health issues like kidney disease and cancer and a lot of things like that. So I would say it's incredibly important. It's definitely the food I've seen over the last however long I've been doing this. It's made the biggest health impact on dogs and cats as far as any single change that somebody can make. In fact, I was working with, and I do less like individual consults now, but I was working with a woman a number of years ago, and it was basically, so with kidney issues, you want that to be very digestible, as far as like the protein content goes, with very little work from the kidneys to actually have to filter out the waste from that digestive process. You also want a lot of moisture in that process. And so doing a diet of half raw milk and half food, I've seen kidney levels return to normal function countless times. With this one lady I was working with, we were able to work her back to normal levels, and then after like 3 or 4 years, like started to decline again, and I was like, okay, now we're gonna go ultra kidney diet. We're just gonna go on milk and bone broth, and that's it. And we got him back down again for another year. But this woman got like 5 or 6 years with her dog that she really wouldn't have gotten. And so, you know, it is the ultimate like sort of revert to nature situation. And it has the most bioavailable forms of 3 vitamins that are hard to find, which are retinol, vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin K2. And those are incredibly important for both people, and they are the animal versions. So that's something we'll talk about when we talk about the food, after we talk about mast cells. So mast cells is an interesting thing. So I have seen, I was just talking about this, there's this really great show called Raw Pet Medics. They're 3, one guy from Ireland and two from England. I was just on their show, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. But it was actually funny because I was invited to speak at a veterinary conference in England, but then COVID happened, and so like I couldn't go. And they were like, oh, you know, this will be great. You can do it from the comfort of your own home. And I was like, I wanted the comfort of the free trip to England. That is literally the only reason I did this. So absolutely ridiculous. So I'm still hoping, but check, it's a great show, great information. And they're actually going to be in Orlando at a big conference, but I get to meet them. I've worked with them, but I've never met them in person. So I really identify as a Midwesterner with people from England because they're very self-deprecating. So I feel like, you know, we have that sort of connection. But we were just talking about fermented foods and histamine levels and mast cells. So basically, when you're dealing with like mast cell cancer, you're dealing with the body overproducing histamine. But the body overproducing histamine and consuming histamine are 2 very different things. And we don't see, there is no scientific correlation between consuming histamines and those histamines that spill out in the body from that process. Here's a good the parallel I like to use is this. So if you look at lactic acid is a byproduct of fermentation. It's very healthy, right? So when you work out, you get sore, and you get sore because there's a buildup of lactic acid in your body. So that does not follow through that if I eat fermented foods and consume lactic acid, my muscles will become sore because of that, because they're 2 different things in the body. And so the only cases that I've seen where there might be a problem with that is if there's a system in the body called the MAO system, which there's an enzyme that helps to basically get rid of excess histamine in food, because there's histamines in like all foods essentially. And if you are on an MAOI medication, I standing for inhibitor, then you could have an issue. But I think where that comes from is, hey, my dog has mast cell and I want to do something. So what can I do diet-wise? And then people kind of conflate those 2. But I haven't seen any scientific literature that says, and in fact, I've seen many, many health benefits from adding fermented foods, but especially not, if you're talking about probiotics, I mean, just like in pill form, there's no histamine associated with that, because that's like you're just putting those bacteria in a medium and then extracting them out, so you don't have to worry about that.
I do remember Roxanne talking about that NLX inhibitor.
Yeah.
We were always confused about doing histamine food, you know, fermented foods with mast cell, because a lot of us have to deal with that. And I remember saying, how would we know if our dog has that NLX or whatever?
Well, it would be, that's a medication.
Okay.
MAOI is a medication, so you would just know. And I don't even know what dog, if there were any, it would be very few. Nothing especially common. I will move into the food. Yeah.
Before you move on, I just want to make sure I understand this. With mast cell, you add fermented foods or you do not?
Yeah, I'm saying you can add fermented foods.
Because they took the antihistamines away when they took the mast cell away.
Yeah.
They took the antihistamines away. So if I add fermented
Oh,
foods,
I get it.
I'm putting it back?
No.
Okay.
So what you were trying to stop was the body producing histamine
Okay.
versus
Right.
consuming histamine.
Okay.
So, I would just start with a small amount and then see what works for you. Yeah, just see what works for your dog. Just kind of go from there. Yeah.
How safe is it, like goat milk, things like that have the high fat for a dog that cannot have or can't seemingly digest fats?
Okay. Yeah. Well, that would be definitely.
Pancreatitis or?
More like I don't know how to say the word, like lymphangiectasia or things like that, where they literally are on like a very low fat food in order to be able to
Sure.
absorb nutrients.
Yeah, and that would be like a really rare case, but we love rare cases. So I would. It depends. There are certain things like you're talking about with pancreatitis, which I think are like misunderstood when it comes to that. But I would focus more on, like, here's a good example. Our rabbit food is pretty low in fat, just because we're going off the natural ratios of what exist in whole rabbits and duck liver. You could incorporate something like that, and if you want to incorporate other fermented foods or other foods that you're not going to get anything that's like exactly the same, and you definitely don't want to go to like skim milk or something like that. And so I would incorporate. I would just work with whatever you're comfortable with. If you've gone somewhere and that's the diagnosis you've gotten, etc., just work with as many whole foods as you can within that parameter. Because there will be people who will say, like, actually, that's not true. Your dog could do this if you. So just finding out what you're comfortable with, and then trying to get as many whole foods in as possible, I think is like, because that's, in general, I think people view fat as unhealthy, which is kind of. One of my themes this year is I hate the term healthy fats because it implies that fat is unhealthy and you need to find healthy versions.
There's also a difference between like the rendered and the regular too.
Yeah,
So
but
you have unrendered in your milk, so I wonder if they're putting that in the same category.
well, all fats that are naturally occurring are healthy in naturally occurring amounts, right?
And that's
I-
key.
what?
Naturally occurring.
Yeah, a good example of that. Trans fats that are created through chemicals in that process, not healthy. Trans fats that naturally exist in meat, healthy. So these things are, it's most of the time when we try to make something is when we like really screw everything up. Like when we try to take tiny little seeds and be like, we're gonna make up a majority of our fat through these by extracting them out and doing these things. So I was trying to figure out a segue to the food there, but I don't think it was happening. So the food, yeah.
Kefir, where does kefir fall into this?
So kefir is just a way to, it actually means fermented milk. So kefir is just a specific way to ferment dairy. Or actually it doesn't have to be dairy. Could be water kefir, could be a lot of things. So it's just a bacteria set that's bacteria and healthy yeast. And in goat milk or cow's milk, you're just putting it in and letting that pre-digest the lactose and grow. Or in water kefir, you're putting sugar in there so they can eat the sugar and make kind of like a soda. But it's really good for dogs with yeast issues because there's a certain amount of yeast that's going to exist within the body. and you want it to be healthy, good bacteria or strains of yeast. And so essentially what you want to do is crowd out that bad yeast. So it can be a really good tool for that. That's kind of going back to that Saccharomyces boulardii thing. That's also a strain of good yeast. And you can do that with our goat's milk too. In the same way, if you go to our website, there's the video about how to ferment it with probiotics, but just do the same process, but with a powder kefir starter.
Was that the key, what you were,
What was the summary of the
Yeah.
question on that one?
what was the?
What is kefir? Yep.
Or how could it be used?
Yeah, how could it be used?
You know, is it better to use something like that, or raw goat milk, or just, do you rotate things like that?
So if you were using kefir, you could do both at the same time, because you could, basically it's this easy. So you take a carton of our milk, let's say a quart, thaw it out on the counter, you put your kefir cultures in there, and then you shake it up and leave it on your counter for 24 hours. And then put it in your fridge. That's the whole process. And then the next time you don't need the starter, because you can just take the one you thaw out and pour some of the last one in there and do the same thing, and then your culture can go forever. What?
Isn't that smell really weird if you're doing that with like the milk?
No. I have a really ridiculously, I'm a huge nerd, if you haven't gathered that yet. But I'm doing this, I do a lot of home projects for myself and family when it comes to, a good example of that. My dog, the only dairy that works for my dog, ironically because it's me, is raw Greek yogurt. So in order for my dog to do this, I have to make yogurt, which is like, I have to ferment it for 12 hours, and then I have to put it in the fridge for another at least 6 hours, usually overnight. And I have to take it out, and then I have to whisk it all together, make it smooth, and then I have to put it in a Greek yogurt strainer and do that overnight. And then my ungrateful dog can do raw dairy. So it's ridiculous. So, but I've been doing this. So I have this yogurt culture that I call special yogurt, and I make raw milk yogurt. I have it every morning for breakfast with 3 raw egg yolks. So that's my cod liver oil, and that's my breakfast. But so when you ask if I was vegan, it's the exact opposite. So essentially, what I did was I used a commercial yogurt starter, and then I also have incorporated in raw coconut yogurt. I've also incorporated in a couple other brands, and then also there's a lot of great local farms here who make raw yogurt, and so I've incorporated their yogurt in, meaning a smaller amount with my base culture. And so that this fall, I think that culture will be like 2 years old, and so I keep that going, and it takes on new shapes and forms. It's so tart at this point that no one else will drink it but me. I like the flavor, but everyone that tries it is like not used to it, because essentially every time you ferment milk, it'll reduce the lactose by about half. But this yogurt is like reduces the lactose to almost 0. So it's an interesting thing. But you can kind of keep your culture going. Another little tidbit for you to get a better ferment as well. Take the carton, wrap it in a towel, and put it in the oven. Don't turn the oven on, just turn the light on. And it'll have an ambient temperature below that light bulb of like 100 degrees, and you'll just get a more consistent ferment every time. So you can do that. Or you can, like me, I bought on the video on the website, there's a specific yogurt maker that I use that keeps it only below 104 degrees. So you still get all the benefits of the raw milk itself, but then you get the postbiotics, all that with the fermentation, that part. So can I move on to the food? Okay, cool. I've been trying to do this, but it's gonna be totally disappointing. So the food is available as of yesterday, and we wanted to do something totally different. And we did freeze-dried first. The number one way you can tell, the best data piece, we're gonna do this feeding trial, it's great. We have the numbers for like what the typical nutrient analysis is, generally. So that's great. But what a lot of people also don't know about food in general is when you look on your bag, if you email the company, if you email us and you say, can I get the nutrient analysis? Great. I'll send it to you. the idea that that is what you're getting every time your dog takes a bite of that food is just simply untrue. So I know this because I'm in the business of testing foods and releasing them to market. And so here's a great example. When we were doing our lamb formulation, we basically do the formulation and then we do test batches and we send those out for the GAs. So you're talking about, it's like a 10 nutrient panel, and then it's like protein, fat, all of that you see on the bag itself. So we actually got a rare chance because we were doing the freeze-dried version for a labeling and we were developing the frozen version. So it was the same batch. And I know based on I actually went to a conference for freeze-drying and HPP, and we know from freeze-dried foods that they carry the same nutrient profile. So you basically don't have to reformulate when you have a freeze-dried food. So we tested the same batch of food, and guess what we got? Completely different results. And guess what we'd get if we tested 20 segments of the same food?
20 different things.
Yes, because when you mix foods together, every bite is not the same. You might take a bite with no calcium. You might take a bite with the right amount of calcium. You might take a bite. So all of these are different. And we knew that already because I was at a nutrition conference like at least 10 years ago in California, and they sent the same liver to 3 different labs and got completely different results. It also goes back to lab testing, which is not as accurate as people generally think. In fact, I was there's something called the lab group at AFCO meetings, which you can imagine how exciting that is. AFCO meetings are the most boring thing you've ever attended in your entire life. I have to pay $500 to go, so I take as many pens as possible while I am there. Last year they had no AFCO pens, they just had normal pens, and I was very pissed off about that. But
They were on to you.
it's ridiculous. But at least it's in Texas this year, so I can eat barbecue, so that's exciting. But in the lab group, they said on any nutrient test, the margin of error is 20 to 50%.
Oh my God.
So what is important about our food isn't that those profiles are important, but what's more important to me is that our beef is just made of heart, liver, and kidney. That's the entire meat content in the food. Because
Some other lab had to test the first lab.
yeah, absolutely.
Some other lab that determined that it was 30 to 50%.
Yes.
I'm just saying.
Yes, exactly right. That's exactly right. And
Most statistics are made up on the spot.
yeah,
20% of statistics are made up.
that's exactly right. Yeah. And so it adheres to the point that you can't know. You basically and so what you can know is how do I get as many healthy foods into my pet's diet. So when we were developing this formula, I was going to say the best data set that we have now is our freeze-dried food has been on the market for a year, and we've had incredible feeding results with it generally. And that's in the actual population of animals that are feeding that alone or animals that are feeding that with other things. I mean, when we had 57 dogs on it for at least a month before we started, from like 5 pounds to 80 pounds. You can imagine how much freeze-dried food we had to feed an 80-pound dog for at least a month. But when we did that, we were getting these like certain data sets back that we wanted, but nothing is as good as what we're getting now. And this is kind of the same formula. So what we did was we have to have a reason to push nutrition in order to do something. We weren't just going to be like, we'll have a freeze-dried food. And most people don't actually even formulate their own foods. They just go to a supplier and say, we want a freeze-dried food. And that's the facility says, okay, here's your options, and this is what we'll do. So obviously we're not going to do that. And so we wanted to make something that was different. I really think we achieved that. So all of our diets, so for the frozen, we have beef, pork, goat, lamb, and rabbit with duck liver. All of them are 3 ingredients from an allergy perspective, and 4 with the rabbit with duck liver. But it is the most efficient food on the market. and limited ingredient for having no synthetic vitamins. So the beef itself is beef heart, beef liver, beef kidney, beef bone, organic kale, and organic kelp, and that's the entire ingredient panel. And it meets the AAFCO Complete and Balanced guideline. And we do that by taking out the muscle meat and replacing it with heart, which has a much better, is much more nutrient dense from a vitamin and mineral perspective. And then we also use more kidney and liver than other brands. And so 99% of those vitamins are coming from the liver and kidney. And that's important because, again, yeah.
Why no chicken?
Great question. So the reason why we don't have any poultry right now is because the premise by which we formulated this is we wanted it to not put in any typical things that some dogs react to, say like fish oil. So if you're looking at something that's very important, there's 2 essential amino acids called that are omega-3 and omega-6. Essential meaning you have to consume them. So most people, if you use, say, not in the form of, there can be good chicken and bad chicken, but if you're using crappy meat, there's going to be a lot of omega-6s in it. So you can artificially increase the omega-3s by adding, say, fish oil to it and then balance that ratio out, because that's what you're looking for is balance. But we don't put anything like that, so all of our ratios have to be anti-inflammatory, but they have to come from the meat itself. So all the omega-3s and 6s come from beef, right? And so you want to stay anywhere from 8 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3 and lower, typically. And any chicken, doesn't matter if it's pasture-raised or not, is going to be higher than that. Doesn't mean we won't do something in the future, potentially, of like, with like, you could combine it with like sardines or whatever you want to do. But for this, we wanted it to be that base, and all of them fit within that ratio. We do use the duck liver, but rabbit is really high in omega-3s, so again, they sort of like balance each other out.
What about venison?
We don't do venison just because it's a supply thing. So we do venison bone broth, which is wild harvested in Hawaii. But like they wanted to give us more stuff, but it was never enough to where we could like, so a good example of that was we do bison in freeze dried, but not in frozen. And it's just because our sourcing is, we've kind of hit the limit for it. And also the way that we formulated it makes it tougher as well because, here's a good example. In goat, we use a little bit of muscle meat, and especially because it's connected to bone, and that's what we want our bone content to be. But the first ingredient is heart, which allows us to do these things. Now, a goat heart is like this big, and we need a lot of hearts to make that formula. And so like it's easier to formulate with like a lot of muscle meat and then just add things to it. So I make it really hard on our production people as far as like, but so all those vitamins come in the most efficient form possible. So a good example of that would be vitamin A. If you go to the grocery store and you buy baby carrots, you'll see on those baby carrots, it'll say like 500% of your vitamin A. There is no vitamin A in plant foods, 0. There is beta carotene, which your body can convert into vitamin A, potentially. Some human populations can't do it. Humans aren't very good at it, actually, and dogs are even worse, and cats can't do it, which is one of the reasons they're obligate carnivores. So there is another form of vitamin A, which everyone's heard of on face cream commercials, called retinol vitamin A. And retinol vitamin A is the actual animal vitamin A that comes from liver, primarily, and in lower amounts, and just meat in general, and in milk, things like that, which is the actual usable form, which is what we're looking for here. So all the vitamins in our food come in that most usable form. Vitamin D is obviously in D3 form. The vitamin, even I know everyone here has a favorite vitamin, but my favorite vitamin is vitamin K2, and specifically, you don't have to remember this, but vitamin K2 MK4, which is different than vitamin K2 MK7, which is essentially, so everyone knows vitamin A and D, which are fat soluble, which means that your body stores them until you use them if you do too much of them. And so people are afraid of general toxicity. You don't really have to be afraid of toxicity if you're getting them from whole foods, because they all help to sort of metabolize each other. Very hard to reach toxicity. You may have seen like Hills had like a recall for vitamin D. That's from synthetic vitamin D, and you can't really control that. It's hard to figure that out. But vitamin A, D, and K2 all work together, and they're all in our food because they're all existent they all exist in organ meat. But K2 is really interesting because it does a lot of things in your body, but it primarily shuttles calcium to where it needs to go in your body, particularly in humans, away from your arteries and away from both while you're consuming things and also pre-existing calcium buildup in your arteries, in your heart. And ironically, and sort of to the opposite of what you've been told, vitamin K2 in its most efficient form is only found in high-fat, high-cholesterol foods like eggs and dairy and things like that, which ironically as well are not bad for your heart because they actually contain the most of this vitamin. There is a really healthy form called vitamin K2 MK7, which comes from bacteria. So you'll get that from fermented foods or natto, which is a really gross fermented soybean dish that smells really bad. So if you want to do that instead of butter, then by all means, yeah, that's fine. But it only comes from two sources. It comes from animals and bacteria. There's no plant source. So it's either animals or fermented food, but both those things are good. But if you like drink kombucha or something, you'll get some as well. So essentially all of our foods contain the most efficient form of those vitamins. So that's why we can have such a limited ingredient panel. It's also complete for dogs and cats. So if you have both in your household or just cats or just dogs, it works for both of those. Yeah. So.
Two things with the raw food, since it's so new and exciting. I had one rep from another food company say they're not using enough muscle meat in a couple of the formulas. It was all organ meat.
Yep.
That was one to address. And then the other one was HPP and the position on what that means. I don't know how many of you are familiar with HPP.
Yep.
But
yeah.
doing it versus not doing it.
So
How many people know of HPP for raw food and some of the things about that?
yeah, I can explain what that is.
And why,
yeah. So
muscle meat versus-
So the muscle meat thing is it just shows you how much we shifted the paradigm on that. It's just out of that person's realm of possibility that could be an issue. And that's what we try to do is we try to say, here's the established model. How do we change this or do it in a way that's better? And I think in the pet food industry, people have been waiting for the next big idea to copy for the next 15 years because it's all the same stuff that you see year in and year out. And they probably won't switch away from it because it's easier to source muscle meat, just generally. But that's really just, I've never seen this before. How can it be good? But, we can.
It's also a lack of understanding of the nutrition, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I can guarantee you in 99% of cases, if somebody says something about our food, I've thought of it before. So it's not, this is all I think about for the most part. So, so one of the things we use on our food is called high pressure processing. And it is, it's one of the safety hurdle steps that we use. So in any food production, you're going to have hurdle steps, which are like different safety measures to keep bacteria at bay. So that might be keeping the temperature in the room under 40 degrees. It might be spraying with ozone. It might be, there's all these different methods by which you do it. It might be bacteriophages. It might, And so this is kind of a hot button one in the industry, and especially a hot button one with me because it's really interesting. I was being interviewed on a podcast recently, and the woman was like, "My vet told me this," and I said, the way that she said it was me, because I was actually the biggest proponent against this and laid out all the arguments against it that people commonly use. And I heard myself in that question. So I was I was debating me from 10 years ago. And so it's been a really interesting process. But I went through a huge process with this, and it basically started with, so essentially here's the crux of it.
Because I thought HPV was something you didn't.
Yeah, so here's the crux of the issue. HPP, you're applying a lot of pressure, and that pressure kills Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. So basically from the beginning, they were like, okay, this is a way to kill these bacteria. So the people who are against it say that it makes the food not raw because you're processing it, because the pressure processes it. So my journey started with this process when I went to an HPP facility, and I was under the impression that this pressure was so great that it created enough heat to cook the product essentially. And I was watching the process, and I looked at the temperature gauges, and it went from 41 degrees to 43 degrees. And I was like, all right, I was wrong about that. So then I said, well, what else am I wrong about? Because I really like being right. I like to be right as much as possible. At home, that happens about like 3% of the time, but at least in my profession, I like to be right, generally. So funniest thing that Emily's ever said. One time I was doing something stupid in the kitchen. I didn't even know what it was. But she walks in and she goes, I'm going to need you to start doing things that make sense. And then she just walked out. So that was like, and she was totally right. So I figured to myself, what else am I wrong about? Because this is something that, we're in the industry that is a factor when it comes to regulatory, when it comes to FDA. This is what they prefer. This is, what they might hound you or not hound you, et cetera. So I wanted to go down and get as much information as I possibly could, because the cornerstone of interpreting data is not holding a position because you said something before. If you're ignoring data because you want something to be true, then you're just not practicing science. So I went on about a year and a half of just getting as much information as I could. I consulted with several PhDs in the technology itself. I actually went to a HPP and freeze-drying conference in Lincoln, Nebraska at the University of Nebraska, which, again, exciting stuff. We were going on tours, and it was, in the van was me, the nutrition guy from Farmer's Dog, a reporter, and then Mars Pet Care. So it was a really interesting group. And so we essentially, so the other part was I looked at all the data as how it pertained to what I consider raw foods to be, right? So essentially, if you look at what do we consider raw foods? We consider raw foods to have their innate enzymes. We consider raw foods to have their bacteria. We consider them if the digestibility is the same after processing, and also what do the nutrients look like after they've gone through some processing, right? Whether it's cooking it or whatever, you're freezing it. All these things change nutrients slightly. So essentially, the data I looked at, and the most relevant data is from a company called Steve's Real Food, and because they're actually testing on raw food. So all the other data comes from other industries, which is applicable, but not as applicable to that. So I did a lot of meetings with the owner of Steve's Real Food as well to look at some of this data. And what I found was I'd been wrong a lot. And so number one, we know that enzyme activity is reduced at most by 10%. Normally it's not even detectable, but most 10%. We also know that the bacteria survive the process that aren't, that comes from a study that was done, or data that was done by a probiotic company that was essentially developing probiotics to sit on food to reduce Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria. They use it actually on kibble because no one's going to have like raw food sit in their thing for like 3 weeks, waiting for this process. And so, but what they would do is this company, when they were testing it, would actually put these probiotics onto food, HPP it, and then test them and the probiotics actually survive this, right? So by the way, there are no probiotics in meat. Meat is like background flora. Not to say that doesn't have an effect, but for people to say it kills good bacteria, we want to be conscious of the fact that there are no identified probiotics in meat itself. So we know the bacteria survive. We also know that the digestibility is the same. Here's the weirdest one, 67% of the nutrients tested to be higher than non-HPP'd foods, and we don't know why. I think it's because, much like when you ferment foods, it sort of pre-digests it. I think when you apply that pressure, it sort of like pre-processes the nutrients somehow. There were 3 ones, vitamin A and 2B vitamins that can be affected up to 20%, and you can really just formulate. Like our vitamin A level is well beyond the minimum requirement, so even if you lost 20% of it, you'd still be, we formulate for that. So I consider high pressure processing to be as benign as any other food safety step after learning more about it. So essentially, you're keeping the temperature down, you're spraying the meat with ozone, you're doing all these steps. I think HPP is a benign process. And also the technology has changed over time. One of my 2 mentors, one of whom is still with us, and the other one unfortunately passed away. We can't talk about that because I will be a wreck in front of you. Nobody wants that. So, but they like me, and one of them still is, are proponents that HPP is not making the food raw. But when all of that started 10 years ago, the technology was totally different. Here's a great example of that. One of the things you'll see presented is that HPPing oxidizes fats. It does when it's done for longer than 20 minutes. So our food is done for 180 seconds and is done at a lower temperature pressure point than they used to do as well. So they basically over 10 years figured out, here's the lowest pressure point we can do and the least amount of time in order to maintain the raw integrity of the food.
So HPP isn't across the board then?
Right, so you're saying it's not all HPP is created equal.
Yeah. And so I would ask your company, like, how familiar you are with the process.
So why do HPP rather than ferment?
That's a great question. So a couple things. We absolutely love the facility where our food is made, and one of the reasons we do fermented products here in Pennsylvania is because they won't entertain doing them, anything that's really fermented. Number 2, I wanted to do something totally different than I had done in the past. I never wanted to recreate anything at Green Juju. I always wanted to contribute to Kelly's vision and the vision she had for the company. And I've always, because when I left my last job and came to Green Juju, people were like, when are you going to do this? Or we want this product. And it was all, things I had done. And so, and plus, I think in a lot of ways it's easier to have a base that's not fermented, and then you can add whatever you want to make the diet more applicable to as many animals as possible. Because that's really what we formulated it for, was for the most sensitive animals to be able to get at least onto that, and then they can kind of for my dog, like when I go take this frozen food home, thanks for ordering that for me, by the way, but when I take the food home, I will use that base as like his nutrient value, his fat, his protein, everything he needs, but then I will be doing our other fermented products on top of that, and there's nothing he's lacking from not having. And then the other, I guess, misconception is that foods that are fermented, like raw dog food, is not actually fermented. So what it means is they have fermented ingredients. So the pH of a frozen commercial food that has fermented ingredients is like neutral. It's like 6.5. If you really wanted to ferment meat, it would be like sausage. Like you can ferment meat to like room temperature to where it can be at, yeah. So that would be something different. And so this is kind of the same concept. If you're using our products, the meat itself is not obviously going to be fermented, but then you can add in other things.
So how do you eliminate the salmonella and listeria?
Well, there's a couple things. So you cannot eliminate those things from your environment. So whenever there's like a recall of a raw food and somebody's like, this is why I make it at home, I'm like, there's way more salmonella in your kitchen than there is in that raw food. It's just salmonella, listeria, E. coli, it's all ubiquitous. It all exists around us. Some of those, it depends on what strain it is, right? There's strains that can make you sick, but then there's also strains that are, have a probiotic effect or have no effect at all. And there's a lot that goes on in the regulatory side that isn't really fair towards a lot of those companies. So you're not going to, every food carries risk, but like with HPP, that's what they call a 5-log reduction, which means that you're reducing it to a level where it is a safe product according to like regulatory, which says a lot because they have, they're not like willy-nilly like I am eating raw egg yolks and that kind of thing. And so, and by the way, the only time I've ever gotten food poisoning was when I went to a restaurant called Medieval Times, where they cook like 800 chickens at one time, and then was not worth throwing up every half hour for 12 hours after that. I was in LA at a friend's birthday party, so that's, but it also smells like a horse. So it was a great night for everyone. But it is actually pretty fun, side note. I'm here to tell you about Medieval Times. I work for them now, so it's all good. So yeah, HPP is, one of the things is like, one of the great things about it was like, I learned that it produces an amazing raw food and it's really good at reducing all the things that people are worried about. And that's why people do it. And our facility in Oregon, I was just out there last week, actually, and I was watching the food production and the line go through. And it's an incredible facility. And so there's a lot of trust there. And so we should be good. And actually, I think the goat is shipping next week. So if you're interested in our... No, it hasn't shipped out yet. We were waiting. Our sourcing is in Australia for our goat and lamb. And the goat sourcing is really cool. It's half pastured farmed goat and half wild harvested goat. So they have an overpopulation problem. And so that one's actually our least inflammatory ratio at 2-to-1 omega-6 to 3, just based on the goat itself. And it was as simple as developing that product. In the supplier emailed me and was like, I heard you like organs. And I was like, I do like organs. And then I essentially was like, what's the quality? And it was actually funny because he's like, here's the quality for the goat. It's farmed, and I want to call me because I want to tell you about the rest. And normally that's like, okay, we can't use it. But when he told me it was wild harvested, I was like, oh my God, that's even better. And then I emailed Kelly and I was like, it checks out. And she's like, should we do it? And I was like, sure. And that was the whole process for us we didn't seek it out. We just sought out, the people came to us with the sourcing and we said, okay, this works. And so we should be good to go on sourcing for goat. The lamb is a little bit easier to get. And actually the lamb is the most economical. It costs a little bit more, but it's higher in calories because lamb just naturally carries more fat calories. So if you're feeding the bulk box, do you guys do Astro?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
We weren't in as of yesterday.
we are going to be.
Okay.
So all the food is on buy 12, get one free, including the bulk box, and you get a free bulk box when you do 12.
Within
So
a year, or is it longer this time?
no idea,
Okay.
to be honest with you. That's like when I go to these sales like conferences and people are like, what's the MSRP? I'm like, no clue. No idea. I know the science part, but it is buy 12, get one free, so that really does help. We do we can't, with our spending dollars, like, again, we don't have investment money, so we're self-funded. So we can't always fund like people's events and stuff, but what we can do is give the savings back to you guys, which I think is the most important thing. So our food is available in 3, 6, and 18 pound. we have the 18-pound bulk, and then our patties are square, so it's kind of nice because they're easier to divide up. They look like a Wendy's cheeseburger. Which every time I talk about this, like I grew up eating fast food, I really crave a Wendy's cheeseburger. Maybe I should like do that on the way home and then just don't tell Emily. That's fine. Yeah. No, I'm a huge 90-10 advocate for your own nutrition. 90% of what I eat is specifically for nutrition, and then 10% I go really hard on like whatever I want. So you got to live your life.
Have to, or it's too hard to do it.
Can I ask you a
Yeah.
question about, you talked about kidney issues
Yeah.
and how the dog lived longer by the milk and the bone broth?
Yeah.
What about liver issues?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Oh, so the question is liver issues for higher amounts of bone broth and milk. Yes, I would say especially with like glycine, which is a really great amino acid that helps detoxify the liver. So bone broth is going to be really, really high in glycine. So I would do like double. You can do as much bone broth as you want. It has like 5 calories an ounce, but I would do at least 2 ounces per 10 pounds of body weight on something like that. And then the same thing is true with all the elimination organs and just digestion in general, as far as all of that is involved in processing what goes into your dog's body in a general sense. And the body doesn't have to process basically anything with raw milk. So what you're trying to do when you're having trouble with liver, kidney, all these things, is to make the body do the least amount of work possible. And so that's where you can really make headway. And basically the way that you figure that out is figure out how many calories your dog eats in a day, right? Let's say it's 300. Then you would take, let's say you want to do half your dog's diet in milk. You just do 150, divide that by 20 because there's 20 calories in an ounce of milk, and then that's how many ounces of milk you do in a day. You could do as many ounces of milk as you want to make up your dog or cat's total diet. Healthy, not, sick, whatever. You can do that however you want.
He's 15, almost 16.
Yeah, so even better with especially the bone broth, because the other thing I would recommend too is we have a product called Lua's Fermented Golden Paste. By the way, this was when Lua passed away. We brought her here as one of her last things. But Lua, the product's obviously named after my dog, who was my inspiration to get me into this whole career path. But we have a fermented golden paste, which is really great for reducing inflammation, because the main ingredient in turmeric is called curcumin. So we actually get the turmeric, we use the whole root. We actually get it's actually a kind of a fun use. We get all of our turmeric comes from Florida. It's organic, and it's the turmeric that's too ugly for Whole Foods. So it's the same turmeric. It's just humans need food to look a particular way. So we buy all this turmeric, and we use the whole root. So there's all these other plant compounds as well. But what happens is, instead of heating it or something to process those starches, instead of adding something like black pepper, which some animals can be sensitive to increase absorption, essentially what you're doing there is you're making the stomach lining more permeable. That's what black pepper does, and so it increases absorption. But what we do is we let the bacteria eat the turmeric first. So the bacteria actually, so if you were to eat turmeric, or your dog is, your body, you eat that and the curcumin in it, your body has to process that into metabolites, which then are used in your bloodstream. So there's all these different names for these curcumin and the other plant substances when they become metabolites. So in this case, the bacteria eat the curcumin and turn it into metabolites for you, and then it goes into your body and is usable. So I would recommend that as well. It's really concentrated. It's really it lasts in your fridge for 30 days. It's available at your wonderful store right up the hill here. So that's it. There's only a 6-pound cup, or a 6-pound cup, a 6-ounce cup. And then the new mushroom probiotic is 8 ounces as well. But they're both pretty concentrated, so it just depends. But and both of those again are made. Bam's Beats are made right here in Pennsylvania. So
I just remember your passion, because when you were here years ago, a couple years ago, you're like, I want the tuber for turmeric. I don't want to make anything that's out of anything synthetic. I want to make a product. I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
Before you even create it.
Yeah, that was one of the, that was what I, when I flew to meet with Kelly, and I was like, I got an idea, and in good faith, I want to tell you something we could do together to work on that, and that was, it was the fermented golden paste, and it was funny because it was like, I think I was like, so if you'll have me, I'd love to work for you. And she was like, I think 2 days later, she was like, all right, we can do it. We got to maneuver a few things, but we can, because it was really just her at that point, running the entire company.
About it. He's like, I want to make a product, but I don't want it to be anything synthetic, or I want to use the tuber root. Where do I find fresh around Berks County or here or Lancaster at that time? I remember.
So.
I've seen that at Central Market.
What's that?
I've seen the turmeric.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Central Market.
Yep. Yeah.
Billy, do you think that raw food, has it been palatable for all the dogs you're feeding? For the raw?
Yeah.
Or are you seeing a high palate?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and obviously the freeze dried was very palatable, but yeah, every dog that we've had on it beforehand, including my own, really likes it. And he's kind of like way too picky, so he likes it though, so that's good.
One question. My dog keeps gaining weight. I don't do raw yet. You guys gave me some free raw that she liked the.
That's the best kind.
It was easy. But so like I counted all the K-cows she's supposed to have. She keeps getting fatter. I don't know what to do with her.
So once you get onto, if you just go onto a really low carbohydrate diet and get a majority of the calories from fat and protein, because remember, fat isn't what makes your dog fat. You'll find that calories aren't calories. What I mean by that is like they're not applicable to each other. I could eat 2,000 calories of Twinkies in a day, and I could eat 2,000 calories of whole foods, and my body would feel completely differently, right? I might be happier with the Twinkies, but my body would feel differently. And I would imagine my weight would be in a different place as well. So I think you'll find once you even just switch to both unprocessed food, but I think the main thing is switching to something that's low in carbs, and starting there. And then you could, because some dogs do have a genetic tendency to gain more weight. It's like labs, trying to think of that have this specific gene but so you could say the same amount of calories, go really, really low carb, unprocessed, and then just evaluate from there and say like, do I need to reduce this? And if they can always help you. If you need to reduce it and you feel like they're not getting enough, there's other things you can add, right, to make them,
Because she's like always in her bowl now. Like I tried to cut back on.
Yeah.
I was doing from kibble with it.
Yeah.
With the freeze dry.
Yeah.
And the goat's milk. And I cut back on the kibble, and it's like I'm starving her. But I don't know if I'm starving her. Is she just so used?
Yeah, never use that as a metric.
Okay.
Like.
She keeps going back to her bowl.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm starving her.
No.
And I look at these-
My dog will eat anything that I give to him at any time, right? But I'm definitely doing like the right amount as far as calories go. Although one time I had my dog at my parents' house, and I was feeding my dog, and my dad's like, is that enough? And I was like, I think I got this. I think at this point I have this down, but it's like that with parents. But
Don't listen to her.
no, not,
Trying to pull one over.
yes, yeah. In fact, one time I had the dog sitter for my own dog. The dog sitter had fed Huckleberry, but then Huckleberry at the time of dinner came up to me and was like, "Okay, it's time to eat." And I was like, "Wait a second, though." But he would have ate a whole nother meal if I would have. Yeah, right.
They just keep going.
Yeah. So keep the calories the same. Go to a low carb diet, and then see where you can go from there.
Okay.
And then these, they're happy to help.
I'm all over the place because we need something easy.
Yeah.
And sometimes
And that'll be, all you'll have to do is thaw it out. Mm-hmm. That'll be that. I'm trying to put them to work, so that's why I say go to them. Yeah.
We're super excited for the frozen but I still kind of want to know, just for convenience sake, we've always had trouble rehydrating the freeze dried without getting stools, so we've always stuck to like a frozen
Yeah.
brand because we can't, even with bone broth, waters,
Mm.
trying it all different ways, different contents of waters, we just don't ever seem to be able to feed freeze-dried. And so then that led me to like digestive enzymes, or what do you think the best attempt at a digestive enzyme to maybe help that, or like, what are we missing?
That's interesting, and you know for sure you're feeding the right amount.
And it is both dogs.
And how long do you soak it for? Have you tried soaking it for a really long time, or? You know, honestly, I think it's their body just saying, "Don't feed me this freeze-dried food." Yeah, I mean, it's easier just to probably avoid it.
Yeah, that's why we're excited that you're gonna have the frozen.
Like, here's a maybe like a little bit of a parallel. There are some days when, like, so every day I feed Huckleberry one of our veggie blends with whatever else I'm doing. Some days he just doesn't eat it, and I'm like, I guess you just didn't want it today. You're just self-selecting, like whatever. And that's fine, right? I'm not like, let me try to church it up and you have to have this. And so I think just like us, some foods just don't work as well. And so like whatever's happening, because there is another processing step there, right? We do have to freeze dry and take the moisture out. So whatever it is, it just sounds like it's not happening. It's not working well. Yeah, that's great. I mean, raw foods have enzymes, and also they have fermented foods produce extra enzymes. But if you find that you can get an enzyme supplement that, you know, let's say it was a fat issue. Yes, for you specifically, if you're dealing with a fat issue, you could get a digestive enzyme specifically made for digesting fat, and then that might help because that would put less. You could. What I would do is I would find a supplement that is made of foods. I'm trying to think of what. Offhand, I don't know. Well, there's a couple things about that though. Vitamin D tests are good baseline, but they're also like if you're doing a blood work test for vitamin D is stored in your fat, so it's really hard to understand if you're actually low or high based on that. So. I would, you know what you could do? You want low fat? You should work sardines into your dog's diet. It can be like the canned ones, just get the spring water ones from wherever, or maybe they have raw ones. But sardines are really low in fat, so you could work to the lower end of that. So like a good example of that would be like our beef diet. You're going to get an equal amount of calories from fat and protein, wherein if you were to do like a sardine diet for the average dog, I would say it's too low, but maybe for your dog that's just right, and then that will be full of vitamin D, so that would be a good thing to do. Yeah.
Quick question. We have all those proteins, like you've got goat, you've got beef, you've got this. Do you sort of like rotate your dog through that? Do you find what they like? Is there benefits for going for different kinds of proteins?
All those things. Next, no, I'm just kidding. So essentially, it's good to rotate because you'll get different fats, you'll get different nutrient profiles generally. But I also think people can overdo that. You know, there'll be people in like online feeding groups who are like, I did 16 proteins this month. But also keep in mind, every food has protein in it. It's not very good quality. Like there's a scale for protein. There's several scales for, you know, everything they measure, but my favorite scale is essentially, so when it comes to protein quality, eggs are 100 on the scale because eggs are the most bioavailable and the best arrangement of amino acids of any food on the planet. As far as that is, eggs are the second healthiest food in my opinion on the planet, but
After the raw milk.
yes, and really neck and neck. I mean, there's this guy, if you're into human nutrition, there's this guy named Chris Masterjohn who's a PhD in fat-soluble vitamins and just nutrition in general. But whenever he's asked what should I take a multivitamin, he always just says you should just eat pastured eggs every day. And that's a way to get all of your baseline of vitamins.
Just
But
a side note, we have really cool powdered quail eggs. You just powder them over your.
there you go.
So that's really fun for something different as a topper.
Yeah. So essentially every other food is below eggs on this scale. And so like milk will be like high 90s, wherein like, meat will be like 80s to 90s. Plants are like way down at like 32, right? Doesn't mean you're not getting some protein from them as well though. So think about even if you used one base protein and you were feeding milk and you gave your dog an egg occasionally or whatever, those are all different proteins, right? But as much as you can go through ours, just find out what works for I will tell you right now, my favorite formulation that we do is the beef. I think they're all great, but my favorite one's the beef because I just think it's so clean in that it's just heart, liver, and kidney. And honestly, like all the other formulas are really great. Here's a good example. The pork has some muscle meat in it. If I could have done it heart, kidney, and liver, I would have, but for sourcing, and we source so high as far as like we use pasture-raised pigs and et cetera, we had to incorporate some muscle meat in order to be able to actually just make the food. So I'll probably be using beef most of the time and then just sprinkling in some of the other ones but that's just my personal preference. Oh, sure.
Your freeze-dried food, after you open it, or whatever, how long can you?
As long as you keep the vitamin pack in it and keep it sealed, it's pretty much like at least 6 months. So there was,
That was me. The other day I bought beef. It appealed to me. Beef with beets.
Okay.
Is that freeze? I don't even know. I just looked at it.
Are you talking about the red? Like
Yeah.
beef red?
Oh, beef red. Okay, yeah. So
What is that? I didn't even look.
It's-
I recommended it. I was like, okay.
that's a salesperson right there. It's a
I'm like,
it's-
yeah, okay.
we have a whole food treat line, which it's a
Yeah, Whole Foods, and then there's Whole Foods.
no. We're actually I think gonna change that name.
Thank you.
Well, so we never had a food, and we called our treat line Whole Food Bites, but now people are getting confused because it says food.
All the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
As food.
Yeah.
And then they told me, oh, that's treats. I was like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. So sorry about that. So what that is we take organ meats, and then each one is a color. So we have beef red, bison green, duck orange. So we have it's like 6 different ones or something. And essentially what we do is we pair organ meat with different antioxidant color subsets. So in nature, they tell you to eat the rainbow because every color is a different antioxidant set. So like in green, it'll be kale, kelp, and dandelion greens. Or in pork pink, it's parsnips, which are white, and then beets and strawberries, which are red. So it makes this like pink color. So those are just basically like treats or toppers or kind of whatever you will. That was actually the first Kelly had just 2 vegetable blends and a bone broth, and that was her first foray into making the first 3 of those.
Or I like that in with the fish. You don't have a fish line, but they have some fish in their treats. So.
Yeah.
Is that the salmon? Oh, I bet.
Well, and I can tell you that I can't, even begin to get into what it is, but we are definitely working on something right now that is really cool. So, so there you go. Just
We're not getting any clues, and then we keep.
just getting into the process now, and it's going to be something that is just totally new and different. So, but the good news is, and don't hold me to this because, timelines are a thing that don't happen a lot of the time, but our timeline is August. So we could have this thing, we're working pretty hard behind the scenes to make this happen. So hopefully it does.
Okay, so food intolerances. Basic, short version, rescue, 20 pounds malnourished. I get him, and they said apropos for life. I said no, and I did fur test, I did saliva test. I also did the microbiome, some stool replacement, started gaining weight and keeping it on because the problem was it would fluctuate. So,
Yeah.
do you think one of the things on the fur test was he was allergic to goat milk, and that's like kind of weird.
Yeah.
So now that I have, it took us 2 years to get him up to 52 pounds. So he's been level for a while. So do you think maybe another food intolerance test would be useful to see if maybe I could add some of those red flag things that were originally marked for him?
What is he on currently?
He does do
Like the
small
food
batch
base.
raw.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I would do is what protein?
I rotate between lamb, beef, turkey, and duck.
Yeah, so what you could do is you could do any of those from Green Juju, and it's going to be such a small ingredient panel that then you can start to experiment with those things, right? So you can move to it, let's say you move to our beef, right? But I would stay just on beef for, say, a month, just to get the baseline there, see what's happening, and then you can introduce one thing at a time and see what works. And then if it doesn't work, then just pull back and you know that the base is good. It's actually, 50% of the reason we released the food was for dogs exactly like yours, which is like, oh my God, what can my dog even eat? Or what can my cat even eat? And it's like, yeah, exactly. And it's like...
You rotate collard greens or dandelion greens, right? Would that matter? Do you think if, just stick with protein first, or do you think...
Well, once you start doing that, then you could establish if you can do the other ones later. So the beef will have kale in it. The goat has parsley in it. So it just depends on the one, but we wanted to keep it at one thing. So for instances exactly like this.
Question. My dog, before your food came out, we were on the freeze-dried Stella and Chewy's. She ate the beef, the salmon, the chicken, all sorts. So all of a sudden one day, didn't like the beef anymore. But yet she'll still eat the from beef frittata.
Sure.
But I can't give her any of the freeze-dried beef because she's stank-faced. She doesn't want it.
Sure.
So do you think I'm wary to try anything because this stuff is expensive, so I'm, spending a lot of money on a bag of food that I might go home and she's like, nope, I'm not gonna eat it.
Hey,
Do you think your beef would be different?
I
don't know,
I think it's palatable. Have you ever heard of the tough love method? No. So all you need to do in these scenarios, is, and it's tough, I think, for most people, which, is the other definition of the tough love scenario, but all you need to do is whatever you want to feed your dog, just put it down for 20 minutes, and if the dog doesn't eat it, then just pick it up and put it back in the fridge, and that's it. You just don't get breakfast. And then at dinner, you put the food down again, and you say, look, here's your 20 minutes, doesn't eat dinner, okay, you're not going to get food. The dog is not going to starve herself.
How many days do you go with that? I got one that'll go 3 days.
Yeah, you could go 2 or 3 days, easy. In fact, there's a lot of benefit to fasting is what we're finding. So really, it's like,
lose some weight.
yeah.
Well, I tried the raw pork the other day.
Yeah.
She's staring at me like I'm not eating that.
Yeah.
So then I just got her rabbit, the Green Juju rabbit, and I gave her the rabbit, and she ate it. So I'm like, I guess she doesn't like it.
And you could find something. Let's say you found a food in our line that she likes. Great. Well, then I would just stick with that. But yeah, if there's ever something like that happens, and then you're not spending more because it's not like, even if you had to throw away that particular batch after a day and a half or something, it's not like you threw that away and then added something else and did, And so I think we all get into the spot of you need to eat, and it goes back to the complete and balanced thing. You need to eat, you need to have all these nutrients every single day, but just think more about your dog and cat's body like your own body. We don't, I go back again to that dog that ate nothing but sweet potatoes for 2 years. The dog was actually doing, though now we did work up to, I'm having her update me monthly, so the dog now gets 10 ounces of goat's milk as its main, and is doing better. But, sort of, and if you think about too, if you go back to 150 years ago, what were dogs eating? They were just eating the scraps from human table, and they were arguably a lot healthier. And actually, we know for a fact they were living longer. And so that's...
more diversity back then.
Yeah, so what you want to do is just kind of I guess, just let them be dogs. You know what I mean? As far as like, maybe they'll eat this time, maybe they won't, and you know, and maybe we'll end on this, but I will be up at the store too, hanging out for a while. But you know, the guy who fills our milk, his name is Irvin, and he has a farm and he has farm dogs, and he's like, you know, my dogs like your food, but they really like the fresh rabbits that they hunt better on the farm. And I was like, I totally get that. And so I feel like, you know, we just need to let dogs be dogs. So thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it.